Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. Welcome to another lesson with me, Matthew Gill, prophet and first elder of the restored branch of Jesus Christ. Um, as you can see, I'm sitting down today. Various reasons for that, some health issues, and also that it's just going to be easier for me to reference material and go through the questions. Um, we're going to be talking about Joseph Smith today, and we're hopefully going to break this over into 2 or 3 lessons so we cover Joseph Smith adequately. So there's enough time to talk about Joseph Smith and the things that we want to talk about Joseph Smith. I have asked for questions to be sent in, and we are going to be going through some questions that have been sent in to us today. And we're also going to be talking about references that you can go to look for things about Joseph Smith. But I'm going to be talking to you today about how the restored branch of Jesus Christ view Joseph Smith, why we view Joseph Smith in the way we do, and also why it's important that you, as a believer in the restoration doctrine and gospel, also have a solid, firm faith and belief in Joseph Smith. So firstly, I want to let everybody know that we do believe that Joseph Smith, well, we don't believe, we know that Joseph Smith was and is a true prophet of God, and that the things that he testified of in his lifetime were true, and that we believe that the first vision is true, that the golden plate story is true, the Book of Mormon is true, therefore Joseph Smith is a true prophet. However, we in the restored branch of Jesus Christ are very hesitant about doing what other organisations do in the in the restoration movement, and that is to put Joseph Smith on such a high pedestal that we can't relate to him, that he becomes a godlike figure, and that certainly isn't what Joseph Smith ever wanted or dreamed about having done to him when he was alive. So I don't think it's right that we do that to him now that he's dead. We need to remember that Joseph Smith, although a great servant and instrument in the Lord's hands, was still a man, and was capable, and did many times make mistakes and errors, and made bad decisions and bad choices. What we need to remember is, just because he made bad choices and errors of judgment doesn't negate his calling as a prophet of God. But what we tend to do with our leaders, with our organisational leaders, is we tend to put them on such a pedestal and deify them to such an extent that they can't make a mistake. Somebody once asked me, do you think it's likely a prophet would make a mistake? And I said back to that person, well, obviously you've never read scriptures, because prophets make mistakes all the time. They make bad decisions and errors of judgment all the time. And what we have to remember about a prophet is they're not constantly talking to God 9 to 5. They have lives to live, and wives to look after, and children to look after, and tribes to look after in some instances. And they are very much like you and I, but prophets are called and chosen to do specific things by God for a certain period of time or for a certain cause. Joseph Smith just happened to be the one that was called and chosen to restore the gospel of Jesus Christ, and to bring about the fulfillment of ancient prophecy in modern times by bringing forth the Book of Mormon. And what we must never forget, brothers and sisters, is if we negate Joseph Smith's calling as a prophet, then we negate and delete the importance of the Book of Mormon. And I must stress to you, brothers and sisters, that the Book of Mormon is fundamental to who we are. It is fundamental to the way we view the gospel of Jesus Christ, and it's fundamental in how we view the world. So to take the line that Joseph Smith wasn't a prophet calls into question the Book of Mormon, which I don't believe in. But before I go any further, I'm going to hold up a few books here so you can see some of the resources. These aren't all the resources by any stretch. Some of the resources that I use and have used in the past to talk about Joseph Smith. And one which we're going to be referencing a lot today is called, I don't know if you can see that, Joseph Smith's First Vision, a guide to the historical accounts. And I'm going to be referencing that today when we talk about the First Vision, because there are some questions about the First Vision in the questions. Another great book, Joseph Smith Fought Polygamy. I have volume 1, 2 and 3. But I just thought I'd show you the volume that was closest to hand. This book by Richard and Pamela Price of the Reorganisation is, in my view, essential to understanding that Joseph Smith was not a polygamist. And you really need to read volumes 1, 2 and 3. Read the affidavits, read the testimonies, because everybody needs to know that Joseph Smith wasn't involved in polygamy in any way, shape or form. Another one, From Darkness Unto Light, Joseph Smith's translation and publication of the Book of Mormon, which is another great book, another great resource. And Joseph Smith Revealed, a faithful retelling and exploring of an alternate polygative narrative, by Whitney N. Horning. I have read this copiously. Yet again, another resource for needing to understand that Joseph was not a polygamist, and that it is really an LDS construct. Another one, The Exoneration of Emma and Joseph and Hiram. It's important. Part 1 by Ronald Meldon Karen. You need to read this. Exonerating Emma Smith is long overdue. It implicates all Mormon factions of Joseph Smith and our Voodoo-based church. And what you glean from reading and studying this is that, as I said, polygamy and the construct of Joseph Smith as a polygamist is very much an LDS tool. Before I get to that one, now this is a book that's not favoured by many, and I don't agree with all of its contents, by the way. However, it's still an interesting read. This is Joseph Smith by Richard Lyman Bushman. I have read through this copiously and made numerous notes. I wanted to read this book because people have been telling me about it for a very, very long time. And it was obviously about the prophet Joseph Smith, which piqued my interest anyway. And I wanted to read this book because of the way in which it's written, because it makes Joseph out to be a liar and a perjurer, and I wanted to see how and why he came to that conclusion. So I would recommend reading that, but not getting invested in it. Another great book that I like very, very much is Brother Joseph, Seer of a New Dispensation, by Richard N. Skousen and W. Cleon Skousen, who I actually like as a scholar. And it goes through Joseph's pre-Kirtland era, his Kirtland era, Nauvoo. And one of the things I like about this is, in the introduction, and I'll just read it to you. It says, this is called Chapter 1, The Rise of a Modern Prophet, which I always find interesting. Throughout the history of the world, the majority of people have never been able to recognize a living prophet. Only a few were able to believe that God could speak to a man who wears the common clay of one's own generation. The rest of the people would idolize the prophets of the past, while they stoned and killed the living prophets of the present. Ask yourself that the next time somebody says to you that they've spoken to God, and you go, nah, I don't have anything to do with that. Okay, that's a good one. And this is another one I like very, very much. Joseph, Exploring the Life and Ministry of the Prophet. It's a very good one. The one that really, for me, are important, firstly, is Personal Writings of the Prophet Joseph Smith. This is extremely important. Why? Because it's journal entries. It's journal entries of the prophet Joseph Smith. And you find a lot in these journal entries that you don't find anywhere else referenced. If you can get hold of a copy, it's by Dean C. Jesse. There have been numerous editions of this. You need to get hold of a copy of this book, because you're not going to find things. You're not going to find things in other books that you find in personal journals and writings. That's important. And finally, the Joseph Smith Papers Project. I don't agree with everything they do. I think it's very LDS slanted to bring out the LDS Church in a good light. But some of the things that they've released are fantastic resources. I have the Joseph Smith Journals, Volume 1 and 2, from December 1841. Well, Volume 2 is December 1841 to April 1843, and Volume 1 is 1832 to 39. Those, get hold of them if you can. They're really expensive. I got mine for Christmas, I believe, one year. But you really need to get hold of these. You need to get hold of these because, as I say, yet again, they're journal entries. And Joseph gives his opinions about things. You understand why he did on certain days. Just for example, 31st of December 1835, this morning at home, after attending to the duties of my family, retired to the council room to persuade my studies. The Council of the 12 convened in the upper room. You can even go back to Christmas Day, I think, on this one. 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th. 25th of December 1835 was a Friday. Friday 25th, at home all day. Enjoyed myself with my family, it being Christmas Day, the only time I have had the privilege to satisfactorily for a long time be with my family. So, they're little insights. So it just shows the prophet did take time off over Christmas. Their insights into a closer relationship with Joseph Smith. I love journal books. Those are just a few of the books that I have. I've got more on my bookshelf, but I wanted to show you a few of those. So, we'll turn to some of the questions, and then we'll get into a little bit more. So, John asks, "What are your thoughts on the many differences of the first vision?" Now, this is something I wanted to talk about today. The first vision is essential to believe in because it lays the groundwork for Joseph Smith's whole story. If you cannot get past the first vision, or you think the first vision is a problem, then everything else that follows is a waste of your time, because you need to understand, and you need to understand the first vision from Joseph Smith's point of view and perspective. Now, I have a different understanding and take on this than many other people. So what I'm telling you is my perspective and the perspective of the restored branch of Jesus Christ. But just before I get to the differences within the first vision, I want to read to you from the personal writings of the prophet Joseph Smith about the first vision here. And this was Church History Times and Seasons 3, March 1842. In response, it's the Wentworth letter that was written, which is where we take our first vision narrative from. He says, in regards to writing this letter, he says, "I retired to a secret place in a grove and began to call upon the Lord." The other thing is the LDS Church are very fond of telling you where the sacred grove is. Nobody knows where the sacred grove is. And to be quite honest, it's not that important. Joseph didn't tell us where that grove was. Anywhere in his testimonies, from the beginning to the end, he never told us where that grove was. And it's not really important, which is why he said, "I retired to a grove." While fervently engaged in supplication, my mind was taken away from the objects with which I was surrounded, and I was enwrapped in a heavenly vision. I saw two glorious personages who exactly resembled each other in features and likeness, surrounded with a brilliant light which eclipsed the sun at noonday. They told me that all religious denominations were believing in incorrect doctrines, and that none of them was acknowledged of God as his church and kingdom, and I was expressly commanded to go not after them. at the same time receiving a promise that the fullness of the gospel should at some future time be made known unto me. And of course, we know the fullness of the gospel is contained in the Book of Mormon. So this account here is in the Wentworth letter. So that's the account that we take. Now, just to answer John's question, using the book, and I knew this anyway, but using this, and this is a widely available LDS book. You can find this in, well, it's a Deseret book, so you can find it in virtually any Deseret bookshop or Latter-day bookstore, which is why I find it incredulous that not many LDS people know what you're talking about when we talk about the first vision and different examples of it. So obviously I've edited this pretty heavily, and it's in chapter 4, and they acknowledge the Joseph Smith papers here, and it says in the 1830s and 40s, Joseph wrote or caused scribes. That's another thing we need to bring up. Caused scribes to write 5 known accounts, declaring that the Lord opened the heavens up to him. 4 of these 5 documents were later copied at least once, sometimes more, resulting in revisions each time. What we have to remember, brothers and sisters, is that many of the first vision narratives that we hear were either written by scribes. Majority of them are written by scribes. They weren't written by Joseph's own hand. So let's look at the primary accounts. What accounts do we have? Well, firstly, we have the 1832 account, written on the first pages of a book used by Joseph Smith to record letters he sent and received. Then we have an 1835 account, November 9th, with an entry in Joseph Smith's journal by his scribe, reporting Joseph's account of the first vision to a visitor. That was reproduced in 1834 to 1836 history. Then we have another 1835, November 14th account. It's an entry in Joseph Smith's journal by his scribe, it doesn't say which one, reporting Joseph's account to the vision to Erastus Holmes. That was reproduced in the 1834 and 36 history of the church. Then we have an 1838 account, scribed by George Robinson and copied into Joseph's history by James Mulholland, and later revised, presumably, we don't know, by Joseph, and copied again by Howard Corey. About 1841 it was done that. It was published in the Times and Seasons newspaper on March 14th, 1842, but redacted by Willard Richards later that year. And later taken out of the Pearl of Great Price. Then we have an 1842 account, which is the one I've just read you, which is the Wentworth letter. Joseph Smith's letter to John Wentworth, published in the Times and Seasons newspaper on March 1st, 1842. Reproduced in 1843 by Israel Daniel Rupp's, an original history of the religious denominations at present existing in the United States. The 1842 Wentworth letter is the one we use, and I'll get to that reason why. So let's look at the 1832 account. In the 1832 account, with his own pen, the document's pretty much written in Joseph's own pen. So we know that Joseph probably, more than likely, would have written the 1832 account. There are different themes running through it. In the 1830 account, it's part of Joseph Smith's earliest autobiography, a rough 6-page statement of epic themes expressed in what Joseph called a crooked, broken, scattered and imperfect language. It declares a history of the life of Joseph Smith Jr., an account of his marvellous experience, which is the grove, and all of the mighty acts which he doth in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God. So, and then, of course, there's the 1832 history of his family. Okay, so there's the 1832 account, and then the transcription of the 1832 account is the most interesting thing. And I don't want to read all the accounts to you, and they are different. But I don't want to read all of the accounts to you because we'll be here all day. But I'll read some of the important bits throughout this account to you. Let me just make sure that I'm not missing anything out here. No, definitely not. Okay, and it says here. It says this is towards. It's a quite a lengthy manuscript, the 1832 account. It says where are we? Where do we start? Let's start. I considered all these things. He's thinking about eternity and his life, and I considered all these things, and that being seek as such to worship him as worship him in spirit and in truth. Therefore I cried. It doesn't even say he went to a grove in this part. I cried unto the Lord of mercy I cried unto the Lord for mercy, for there was no one else whom I could go to obtain mercy. And the Lord heard my cry in the wilderness. And while in the attitude of calling upon the Lord, in the 16th year of my age, a pillar of light above the brightness of the sun at noonday came down from heaven and rested upon me. And I was filled with the Spirit of God, and the Lord opened the heavens upon me, and I saw the Lord, and he spake unto me, saying, Joseph, my son, thy sins are forgiven thee. Go thy way, walk in the statutes, and keep my commandments. Behold, I am the Lord of glory, and I was crucified for blah, 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 blah. Okay? Then we get the 1835 accounts, which I would encourage you to read fully through. But in the November 9th, 1835 account, he talks about reading from the Bible for the first time in the Upbraideth Not section in James. And then he says, I called upon the Lord for the first time in the place above stated, or in other words, I made a fruitless attempt to pray. My tongue seemed to be swollen in my mouth, so I could not utter. I heard a noise behind me, like some person walking towards me. I strove again to pray, but could not. The noise of walking seemed to draw nearer. I sprung to my feet and looked around, but saw no person or thing that was calculated to produce the noise of walking. I kneeled again. My mouth was open, and my tongue liberated, and I called upon the Lord in mighty prayer. A pillar of fire, not light, appeared above my head. It presently rested down upon me, and filled me with joy unspeakable. A personage appeared in the midst of this pillar of flame, which was spread all around, and yet nothing consumed. Another personage soon appeared like unto the first. He said unto me, Thy sins are forgiven thee. Testified unto me that Jesus is the Son of God. I saw many angels in this vision. I was about 14 years of age. Then, of course, we go to the famous November 1835 account, right? Which waffles on and on and on, which I believe is in the Pearl of Great Price. I retired to the place where I had previously designed to go. No mention of where or what it was. Having looked around me and found myself alone, I kneeled down and began to offer up the desires of my heart. I had scarcely done so, and I was immediately seized upon by some power which entirely overcame me. So it's very similar to the last one. Thick darkness gathered around me, and blah, 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 blah. When I was ready to sink into the pits of despair and abandon myself to destruction, not to an imaginary ruin, but to the power of some actual being from an unseen world, who had such a marvellous power as I had never before felt in any being, just at this moment, a great alarm, I saw a pillar of light exceedingly above my head, above the brightness of the sun, which descended gradually until it fell upon me. It no sooner appeared than I found myself delivered from the enemy which held me bound. When the light rested upon me, I saw two personages. Of course, everyone knows the rest of that. Then we get an 1842 account, which I've already read to you. And then we get contemporaneous secondary accounts by Orson Pratt, etc., etc. Orson Hyde makes an account in 1842 of an Orson Hyde, and there's a Levi Richards account. So, lots of these accounts were written by the people, not by Joseph Smith. So, what I want you to think about, in all of those different versions, what are your thoughts? And John asked, what are my thoughts on the many differences? Well, I don't see many differences in those visions, to be honest. What I see is a man coming to terms over time with an experience that happened to him at a very young age, that wasn't written contemporaneously either. Coming to terms over an event that happened to him at a very young age and trying to understand the events of that vision. The people that pick out the differences and say, oh, well, Joseph just embellished as he went along. Okay, I can understand why some people would believe that. I just see a man now understanding what a young teenager could not understand. He saw a pillar of light. He saw a light, whether it's pillar of fire or light. You know, he saw a personage and then two personages. They were both looked exactly the same. The message in the visions is slightly different. Firstly, Joseph he's told his sins are forgiven him, and then the Lord tells him that none of the churches are true. They're all false. He doesn't tell him he's going to start a church in the first vision, which is another misconception. He doesn't tell him he's going to start a church or anything of that nature. He says the fullness of the gospel will be revealed at some future point. So I don't see any issue with the first vision accounts, other than a man coming to terms with a vision that happened to him at a very young age and trying to understand that. And as he's understanding it, as he's growing in stature and understanding, he learns to understand the things he saw in that vision differently. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think we expect far too much of Joseph. We expect Joseph to be this whiter than white, sinless person who never makes a mistake, who gets a narrative right all the time, and that's just not the case. I mean, if you've ever had a spiritual experience of that nature and tried to explain it to somebody who wasn't there, it's very difficult. How do you explain exquisite whiteness? How do you explain brightness and fire without heat? It's very, very difficult to explain to people who weren't there. And then, of course, it's very, very difficult to get people to even believe what you saw anyway. So I don't see anything wrong with the differences. As I said, I see it as a gradual understanding of a man who's growing in stature and understanding throughout his life. I think it's interesting we don't hear another narrative after 1842 from Joseph. But I think after that period of time he's got more on his plate than the first vision. David asks, is Joseph a reliable source of information? As reliable as anybody else could be at that time. The first vision was never written contemporaneously. It was written after the fact, years after the fact. It was, in many cases, written by scribes. It wasn't in Joseph's hand. So I think we need to be careful about that. But I think for basic source information, I think Joseph's reliable. He certainly doesn't alter the actual mechanics of the first vision, and he certainly doesn't alter the fact that he saw something and he saw someone and they told him something, and he saw a white bright light, and sometimes he described it as fire without heat. So I believe he's a reliable source of information. I think a lot of information, a lot of source information has been accredited to Joseph that isn't anything to do with Joseph, and I understand that. We need to be careful ourselves about which information we read and what information we take into our unconsciousness. We have to be careful of that. Alan asks, how do you respond to people who question Joseph and then leave the movement? Well, that's going to happen. You question Joseph Smith, you question the first vision, and of course everything else seems to unravel. Well, if he didn't have the first vision and he made it all up, then obviously the plates weren't true, and he obviously made the plates, and the story on the plates isn't true, and the Book of Mormon isn't true, and if the Book of Mormon isn't true, the restored gospel isn't true. It's very convenient for people who lose either interest or faith in the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. The problem people have with me is they can't pigeonhole me, because I didn't leave an organisation and then leave the restoration. I left an organisation to do something else within the reorganisation, within the restoration movement. So that's why people find it hard to pigeonhole me, because they believe if you leave their organisation, then you're leaving truthful behind. Well, I would disagree with that. But I can see how people, once questioning Joseph Smith's narrative, it would unravel very quickly, which has been the case for the Community of Christ, when they downgraded Joseph from a prophet. And of course, everything else then follows that the Book of Mormon isn't a real scripture. So Mary asks if Joseph lied about the first vision, he lied about everything, and he's a liar, obviously. I mean, it's pretty. The reason I included that statement or question, it was not really a question, it's a statement from Mary, is because that's right. And we have to, as people, believers, receive a witness and a testimony that Joseph Smith is who he said he was, and was who he said he was. We need to be careful about making Joseph into something he's not. Joseph did things in his life that I don't understand, but I don't ever believe he lied. I certainly don't believe he lied about polygamy. I certainly don't believe he lied about the first vision of the Book of Mormon. For me, there are too many witnesses to the Book of Mormon, for a start. Second, about polygamy, if you read the books I've told you to read, Joseph Smith Fought Polygamy, Joseph Smith Reveals, The Neil's Honoration of Emma and Joseph and Hiram, if you read those books carefully and closely, what you're asking people to believe is that Joseph Smith said something publicly and then in private did something else. That's okay, but then you've got to remember who was in his private life. Emma never, ever, ever, ever mentioned any other wives. There were no other wives at Joseph's grave. There were no other wives tending to the bodies of Joseph when he died. No one grieved for Joseph the way Emma did. And I don't believe a woman who, according to some people, was that ill-used would stay so closely to the memory of a man who she didn't like. So there are many, many, many things about that, which we can talk about later. And we will get to the polygamy in part 2. What are your thoughts on Joseph Smith and polygamy? Sure, all right, I'll talk about that next time. I don't want to go into polygamy too much today. What's this one? That was from Philip, so I'll talk about that next. Let me just highlight that. So Debbie asks, do you subscribe to the Dan Vogel idea that Joseph just used others around him to achieve his ultimate goal? No. I've read Dan Vogel. I've heard him speak. I think he's an extremely intelligent man, extremely able in what he does. I don't buy into his concept of Joseph. I certainly don't buy into the concept that everything he did was a fake, and that the restored gospel itself is a made up concept. I just do not buy into that. So no is the answer. I don't subscribe to Dan Vogel's idea that Joseph just uses others around him to achieve his ultimate goal. Emma's next question is probably more. She says, surely if Joseph was a liar, shouldn't he have left behind him everything that happened to him? Would you go through all the hell he went through for a lie? Well, it's a valid question. Thank you, Emma. I don't know. I mean, I think if Joseph was a liar and a charlatan and a con man, most con men and artists have a point in time where they let the con drop, and they think, "Oh, I'm in too deep here. I've got to disappear and make something else happen for myself." I don't think Joseph would have been a committed con man to have gone through tar and feathering, losing children. His wife lost numerous children. Poverty. I mean, grinding poverty. No, I don't think so. I think if he was a liar, he would have left a con man. He would have just upped and left it all behind. I think the conviction that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God is the fact that he did stick it out. He did go through all that, and that he did grit his teeth and bear it, and give sermons after mobbings and all kinds of stuff. So no, I don't believe he was a liar, and I certainly think if he was a liar and a con man, it would have been far too easy for him to have just left it all behind and start again somewhere else. So Joseph Smith. The restored branch of Jesus Christ believe Joseph Smith still is a prophet of God. We believe he still holds certain keys that are fundamental to the redemption of Zion and for the building up of the kingdom. I also believe that we need to understand Joseph Smith, to understand ourselves, and we are far too quick to write Joseph off, far too quick to condemn him over things that he ought not to be condemned over, and far, far, far too quick to deify the man. Far too quick. That was something I had to unlearn very, very quickly, and it can be very hard to do. Joseph Smith was a man. He had a family and a wife. He had struggles. He had temptations. He had all kinds of things going on in his life. At the same time as receiving the plates, receiving revelation, documenting revelation. A lot, building temples and building cities and settlements. There's a lot going on in Joseph's life, and so he made a few mistakes. Shoot the man. I mean, he made mistakes. I believe his death was a huge mistake, which we'll cover later. But I just wanted to outline to you a few things about Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith is important in our life as a family and as a church. And we have Joseph Smith up in our dining room here, so praying in the grove, and we've got books all over the place and statues of Joseph Smith holding the Book of Mormon and pictures up everywhere. And he certainly is an important part of my life, an important part of my family's life, and an important part of my small branch's life. And I've only been through a snippet of the things that Joseph Smith went through in his life at a small degree, and I find it extremely taxing, grueling and tiring, especially when you're talking to people about these things who either don't want to listen or think you're an idiot. So I can understand how Joseph would have felt at certain times, and I hope that I quit myself as well as Joseph did, and live my life as well as he lived his. And I just wanted you to know in part one that there are resources aplenty about Joseph Smith. There should be no excuse for people not knowing who the man is, or at least having a glimpse of who the man is. So I would encourage you to get hold of some of those books I've shown you today. Read them, pray about them. Always pray about them. Pray about the first vision. Pray about all the first visions you read about. Pray about them. What does God say to you in your heart? What does he say to you? That's a big indicator. So I hope that hope you've enjoyed this session. We will be doing a part 2 and a part 3. Part 2 I'm going to cover polygamy and the arguments around polygamy and some of the crazy things about Joseph Smith that we hear about. And then in part 3 I'm going to cover Joseph's martyrdom and how we view his martyrdom, which is extremely different to how other people view his martyrdom. So I hope you enjoy this video. It's an introductory video. I hope that gives you something to think about and gives you something to pray about. So until we meet again, brothers and sisters, look after one another, take care of one another. We're living in very, 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 very dark, difficult times, and we need to make sure that we're staying on the straight and narrow. And with my continual health issues, I hope to be able to give you these videos as often as I can. But part 2 I'm hoping to get done so that it's done and ready and in the can. So until we meet again, God bless you, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.